Yeah. So let's talk about this is a category, Patrick, where we're going to pick. So we've talked about this on the show many times that horror doesn't get appreciated at the Academy Awards nearly enough. Now, I've had a growing issue with the Academy Awards over the last 5 or 6 years where they nominate 10 best films and they still get it wrong. Nominating shit that no one watches and no one's ever going to see. And at
I
least
see them all.
and you can you can at least nominate a couple different films, like actually vary it up a little bit. Because when films start coming out during the year, I'm like, I know that's going to get nominated. It's 100% going to get nominated. This is Oscar bait. That's a whole other subject. But we do know for a guaranteed fact, Patrick, that horror constantly gets overlooked. And outside of Silence of the Lambs, which is the one horror film that has won Best Picture at the Oscars, there's been a lot of there's been nominations. I say a lot of there's been nominations across like spattering. We mentioned Carrie got some, The Exorcist got some, Jaws. There's been a few other ones. Get Out, of course, more recently. But again, that did win. Get Out did win Best Screenplay, so give credit where credit's due. Hardly ever does it get full accreditation across the board where we're talking about acting nominations, but particularly Best Picture.
Yeah, that's the really rare one. It's very rare that Best
the
Picture
rarest
happens.
of the rarest. Yeah. So what you and I are going to do right now is we're going to name 3 films from horror history that deserved Best Picture Oscar nomination. So Patrick, do you want to give your list first?
Yeah, I'll give my list first, in no particular order. First, I would say a movie that we just recently talked about as being snubbed at the Oscars, and that was Speak No Evil. Now, obviously, if you've seen Speak No Evil, you'll know that the end is so horrendous that it would kill most of the Oscar voters who are past the age of 60 or so. It's absolutely the end of that movie is one of the most horrific movies you'll ever see. However, most of the 90 minutes of the 100-minute movie is one of a very well crafted, well executed movies that is an exercise in discomfort. That's how I like to call it. I'd like to say if it's like if the guy who directed Triangle of Sadness, which just got nominated for Best Picture, it's like if he had directed a horror film. It's incredibly well made, incredibly well acted, cinematography, editing, writing across the board. It's a fantastic movie that just happens to be one of the most disturbing horror movies that I've ever seen in my life. But it is a picture perfect movie. And bonus, on my regular list of top 5 films of the year, it came in at number 2, only behind Emily the Criminal. And I think I told you this when I texted you that if Emily the Criminal hadn't been around in 2022, Speak No Evil would have been my number 1 movie overall of the year. So to me, Speak No Evil was a no-brainer, but also I knew Oscars were going nowhere near it. My number 2, another movie we talked about recently that we said if we had the podcast back in, I believe it was 2018, if we did have the podcast, Hereditary would have very likely been our horror movie of the year. I think Hereditary has everything you are looking for in a best picture movie. Incredible acting. We talk about Toni Collette being robbed. Everybody talks about Toni Collette being robbed for best actress. An incredible screenplay, incredible performances across the board, incredible directing, incredible cinematography. This movie had everything. It really did. It really had every single element you need for a best picture requirement. And it's a shame that it didn't get recognized in that way, because it is, even looking back, a better movie than I ever expected. And my number 1, probably obvious, is my number 1 movie of all time, and that's Alien. I love Alien. Okay. Fantastic production design, fantastic directing, fantastic acting. It was inspired by the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which does not end up on my list. Now, I've said that Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of the best movies ever made, but I know it wouldn't make an Oscar list. It doesn't. The cinematography is, sometimes not great. The dialogue sometimes not great. The acting not always great. So I knew that it couldn't really be on this list. But Alien is a product of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Ridley Scott watched Alien and said, I can do that, but in space. And that's exactly what he did. And I love the raw interaction between the people on the Nostromo, of course, the great Sigourney Weaver. That's a movie that you talked about this movie being perfect. I think Alien's perfect. I couldn't. I looked through that movie and I can't change a thing. I go, nah, I wouldn't mess with that. I wouldn't mess with that. I wouldn't mess with that. To me, Alien was a shoo-in for a Best Picture, but of course, it's a horror movie. Oscars aren't likely going to touch it.
Really disappointing. Alien is another one that's about as. I think Alien and Aliens back to back are probably the. I mean, I know I'm not thinking out loud here because I also love Terminator and Terminator 2, but I would think Alien and Aliens might be the best 1-2 punch like original and sequel ever.
Yeah, I think so.
I think it probably is in my mind. I'm trying to think if there's one better, but I can't. Like that might be the best ones ever.
Yeah.
Alien is perfect, and Alien is perfect, and I think Aliens is a much different film, but it's also perfect in its own way.
I think Aliens is like the perfect action film.
It is. It's the perfect action thriller horror film. Like
Yeah.
it's 100%. All right. So there's a common theme in my first two films, which is apparently I'm following down the serial killer hole here. Um, First up for me, I mentioned it earlier in the show. I'm going to bring it up right now. The fact that this film didn't get nominated for a billion different awards and only ended up getting nominated for one, which was Best Editing, which is a joke, is Seven. David Fincher, incredible direction, of course. Morgan Freeman, Brad Pitt, and of course, less likable now, but at the time, he was an incredible actor as Kevin Spacey, as John Doe. Gwyneth Paltrow, the whole thing was orchestrated and just done beautifully. It's the perfect. I mean, it's another one. It's a perfect film from start. There's not a flaw in that movie. It is done so incredibly well, and acted and executed. And even like again, the character actors in that movie. Arlie Ermy is so great as the captain of the police force.
So good.
And it took me. I think I mentioned this. We may have talked about this off the air. I can't remember if we talked about this off the air or during a past conversation. I didn't realize until like a couple years ago watching that movie that they never say where that film takes place.
No.
They never say it's in Chicago. I always in the back of my head for some reason I had it in Chicago. They never say where it's at. They never say we're in Chicago, we're in LA, no, they never tell you where that film takes place at, which is just brilliant. And it's just so good. It's such an incredible Andrew Kevin Walker script and the whole thing. It's so well plotted out and the execution of it all is so well done. And then of course the ending, which is iconic, one of the greatest shock twist endings of all time. Was it the bugs? It's just that one should have been nominated. I didn't do a deep enough dive here to see what won that year, but I would say at worst it should have been nominated. At best it should have won.
Yeah, definitely.
Number two for me is another one that is it's a cult classic now, but it was a very divisive film when it came out, which pretty much doomed it ever getting nominated for anything, and that is American Psycho. I think American Psycho is listen, and I'm guilty of it. When I saw American Psycho in the theater, and I saw it in the theater, I left the theater going, "What the fuck is this? Like, this is the weirdest." The ending confused the shit out of me. I was like, "What is this? This is so weird." I didn't understand it. It didn't really make me laugh. I just thought it was just weird. It did not get me. But I've watched it a million times since then. I quote that film all the time. It is satirical about wealth and the wealth inequality in this country, and so well executed and so well done. And of course, Christian Bale just knocks it out of the park. I know he won an Oscar, right, for The Fighter. For that,
yeah, I think for The Fighter, yeah.
Don't get me wrong, The Fighter was a great role. Him and Mark Wahlberg, good movie. I liked it. I like boxing movies. So I'm not downgrading that performance, but I think this is the best performance of Christian Bale's career. He is so good in this movie. He is Hannibal Lecter unleashed. Like, he is Hannibal Lecter out of the cage. Like, and obviously he's doing it in a much more satirical way. He's not nearly as calculating and devious as Lecter. But again, he's the guy you don't see coming. It's just that great scene where he walks up to the crosswalk with the woman and she kind of stares at him and then she like doesn't want to look at him and then she's like, "Oh, he's kind of good looking," and he disarms her and he's just like, "How are you?" or whatever he says. And then, next morning he's twirling her hair in his finger because he killed her and ate her or whatever. American Psycho is just great. It's just such a brilliant film. Now, my third choice is going to be a bit of a surprise to you, Patrick. I had to go a little outside the box for this one. I had a couple other ones picked. I was going to go The Devil's Rejects because that's my favorite horror film of all time. And I think, without a doubt, Sid Haig should have been nominated for Best Supporting Actor for his portrayal as Captain Spaulding. I think he was brilliant in that film. I think he was so good in that film. But I didn't go there, even though I think it is a great film and I think it definitely deserves it. Here's where I went, because this is one of the most underrated horror films, thriller films of the past 20 years. I went with 2011's Red State by Kevin Smith.
Ooh.
Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's a perfect film because it's not. There are flaws with that film. There are things I don't like about Red State. I love Kevin Smith. Even I can sit here and say honestly that Red State has flaws. But it is a lot of what Oscar films end up being are. I'm not saying it's wrong, but less about story, more about performances, right? Like that's a lot of Oscar films. They get nominated because the performances are so good, and the story may be kind of middle of the road. Now, Red State has a solid story, but the performances are off the chart, and that starts with Michael Parks. The late great Michael Parks is so incredibly disturbing and disarming in this movie. He is just dark and foreboding. And then John Goodman is the FBI agent. He is so good. The hero role, but he's kind of like the anti-hero a little bit. Like he's, plays outside the box a little bit. I didn't realize till I rewatched this fairly recently. Nicholas Braun, Cousin Greg, is in this movie from Succession. Kyle Gallner, who's an all-time classic. But yeah, this movie is just, it is so dark, and obviously it's based loosely upon the Westboro Baptist Church. But, Michael Parks is great, and Melissa Leo is in this movie, and she's great. And I just think this was one of those, I honestly think this film got ignored or got bad reviews because of who directed it. Because there's a lot of Kevin Smith haters out there who just don't like him, don't like his demeanor, don't like his attitude, don't like the way he talks about things, don't like he publicly put down directors like Paul Thomas Anderson because he didn't like Magnolia, like things like that. And I think critics kind of like, well, screw this guy. And so they immediately go in with like if they're a Rotten Tomatoes meter, they're already going into the movie at like 50%. And then you have to build up or you're going down. And I think that's what happened to Red State. So I think Red State, highly underrated film, very dark film, very disturbing film, very timely film of that era and still relevant today. And that's my kind of dark horse pick that I was like, you know what? That deserves some flowers.
That's an interesting one. It's a good pick, by the way, because I do think that overall it's probably Kevin Smith's second best movie. I think Clerks is still his best movie, and it holds up incredibly well. But Red State it's a strong showing. I will say, I don't think it's because they don't like Kevin Smith. I think because it's a very pointedly political movie that makes a very, very, very strict political statement. Like it's really towing a very specific line. I think a lot of voters are unattracted by that in particular. Rarely is something that is that hard line about saying like these particular people are bad. I think it might have been more of that. Also, let's be honest, they just don't nominate a lot of horror movies. But I loved your picks. American Psycho. That movie gets better every time you watch it. It really does. That's an incredibly good movie and a great pick for you. And I'll tell you this about Devil's Rejects. I, at the time, would have said Will Forsythe should have gotten Best Supporting Actor.
Oh, yeah, he's great.
He was so... I promise you, if you asked him right now, what's your best performance you ever put out? He'll go, Chief Wydell, Sheriff Wydell. Like, I guarantee you that was his best performance that he's ever done. It was something to behold, and I would bring that up to other people, and they go, yeah, he was really good in that movie. So those are cool picks, man. I would have never guessed Red State.